I'm Scott Snibbe, and this is How to Train a Happy Mind. For those of you who've been listening for a long time, you'll notice something a little different about today's episode. After 168 episodes of A Skeptic's Path to Enlightenment, we're changing the name of our podcast. Our new name matches the title of the book I released earlier this year. How to Train a Happy Mind has attracted many new listeners to the podcast, with its clear instructions on how a rarely taught type of meditation adapted from Buddhism can create happy minds, more fulfilling relationships, and a better world. Our new podcast name also matches that of the growing Train a Happy Mind community that anyone can now join for weekly meditations, online discussions, and classes at trainahappymind.org. The podcast is still a project of the nonprofit Skeptic's Path to Enlightenment, and all of your donations to it will continue to support the podcast, community, and classes. If you've benefited from any of these, please consider going to skepticspath.org or howtotrainahappymind.org to support us right now. Today's guest, Dr. Cornel West, is someone I've admired and respected for decades. Dr. West combines a formidable intellect with an enormous heart and an unceasing drive for social justice that transcends his multiple identities as an academic, author, philosopher, theologian, political activist, social critic, and public intellectual. Many of you even know him as an actor for his brief but memorable appearances in the Matrix films. And of course, Dr. West is an independent candidate in this year's U.S. presidential election. I spoke with Dr. West a couple of weeks ago about compassionate leadership, nonviolence, social and economic justice, and the balance between inner and outer transformation that he believes is required to truly steer the world toward the thriving of all human beings and all of life on Earth. Dr. West, it's a huge honor to have you on the podcast, and I'm an admirer of so much of your writings and work, and especially how you've emphasized the importance of personal transformation throughout your career. So welcome to A Skeptic's Path to Enlightenment.
Well, my brother, I'm just blessed to be here, and I salute you, your works, your witness, your text, and your wonderful, wonderful temperament and personality.
Thank you. That's so kind. That's so kind. Before we get started talking about the future, I know a lot's happening in the world at the moment, and I'm curious what's going through your mind, what's in your heart right now?
We're in such a spiritual low point in the empire right now in the USA. And of course, we're such a wretched species in general in terms of our accommodations to greed and fear and hatred. But we're also a wonderful species because we have the capacity for change and transformation and getting beyond greed and getting beyond hatred and getting beyond lies. And more, it looks as if in a highly commodified culture, everything's for sale, everybody's for sale. It's all about brand, it's all about money, status, position. So that selling out becomes normal and natural rather than cutting against the grain, which becomes more naive and frowned upon. And I do believe there's an intimate connection between the quest for truth and integrity. That's why Socrates means so much to me, not reducing things down to just the quid pro quo and the transactional. Now, on the other hand, you and I know Socrates never cries, he never sheds a tear, so it's clear that he doesn't put a premium on loving persons, he's loving wisdom. Philo Sophia, anybody who loves persons weeps. Jeremiah weeps, Jesus weeps, and so forth. It showed Buddha deep compassion, weeps on the inside and the outside. Anton Chekhov never weeps externally, weeps every day on the page internally in his plays and his short stories, you see. So somehow we've got to fuse the spirituality of Socratic questioning with the spirituality of prophetic witnessing, which is tied to weeping, a sign that you're not numb to other people's suffering. You're sensitive to other people's misery and you want to do something about it.
It's very unique what you say of linking truth to compassion, because we tend to think of truth as intellectual, but I like how you directly link it to the truth of our feelings, our emotions, and caring for one another. This is your first pillar. Your platform, the title of your platform is really phenomenal. It's a movement rooted in truth, justice, and love. You don't see love in anyone else's platform. Can you tell us what love means to you and how it fits in with politics?
The great Reinhold Niebuhr used to say, any justice that's only justice soon degenerates into something less than justice. And what rescues justice? Well, mercy. So for me, the reason why the love is important is because you have to have something more than just justice or law.
Mhm.
What sustains any struggle for justice is not just justice itself, but it's the love and care you have for the persons who are being violated, whose dignity is being called into question. But even in addition to, and this probably I think connects to my own Black tradition, that tenderness is what love feels like in private. You see that Black folk are often associated with a certain kind of soulfulness in our music and our walk and in our talk. And soul is the sharing of a soothing sweetness against the backdrop of a grim catastrophe. And so you're not denying catastrophe, you're not evading it, you're trying to work through it. But sweetness allows you to be equipped along with the compassion, along with the other virtues.
That's beautiful, beautiful. So it sounds like social justice needs to also include social love. Right?
Absolutely. That's a beautiful phrase. That's you're absolutely right. Indeed, indeed.
One of the principles that I most admire about Buddhism is its grounding in nonviolence. And I'm really struck by your own platform's foreign policy that's based in nonviolence. And to many, this will feel radical, if not impossible. Can you tell me about how you came to embrace nonviolence?
Part of it is a matter of just acknowledging that so much of the history of the species is the history of war and psychic and economic violence toward others, spiritual violence toward others. And one of the fundamental challenges of being human is how do we break that cycle? And how do you break it? Well, you got to talk about it. You got to acknowledge it. You try to analyze it. And then you try to go another way. You try to provide a new vision for the species, for we human beings, and for all sentient creatures, for the planet, that could break the cycle of violence that is so often tied to greed and hatred and so on. Now, Martin and my dear brother, I should mention Desmond Tutu, who I knew and was blessed to spend high quality time with him. He and Martin were real, what you could call nearly absolute pacifists, that they could never conceive of conditions under which some form of violence would be justified. Now, I don't go that far. That I think that nonviolence ought to be at the center, at the core of our moral compass. But I can conceive of conditions under which some form of just war would be permissible. So I'm a little bit closer to Augustine on that. But because the conditions are just for me so rare that for the most part I'm with my pacifist brothers and sisters in terms of trying to pursue not just nonviolent options and alternatives,
Yeah,
but to just,
even in Buddhism, violence is allowed for with two caveats. It's self-defense,
yeah,
and if you can win,
self-defense and you can win.
yeah, you have to have both those conditions.
That
Robert
second one
Thurman
is
told me that.
based on a real utilitarian calculus, though, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, but you cause it so much additional suffering if you can't win, and then so many people,
Oh, that's true.
right?
That's true. But tell me about your journey, though, brother. How did you land or end up where you landed now?
Well, I like to joke I used to be a part-time Buddhist and now I'm a full-time Buddhist, you know. Um, I was always kind of interested in those principles of, nonviolence, be kind of just born that way, really not liking violence and not liking, got into a fight almost every week in elementary school. There was a lot of violent boys. But I was raised a Christian Scientist, which is quite odd. It's a rare religion that believes in the mind, that everything is the mind. And then I came to Buddhism through my brother who worked at Harvard, and he got introduced to His Holiness the Dalai Lama in the year 2000 and saw him speak. And when I saw him, I wanted to be like him, because I knew his, particularly because of the political situation, because knew they suffered a genocide, a Holocaust,
Oh, I
and
know.
yet His Holiness maintained nonviolence as his core principle. He said, if we kill one Chinese person, we make 100 enemies. And that just blew my mind. And yet he was still so happy and joyful, had very strong political convictions and moral convictions. So
Right,
I just wanted
right.
to follow his path. So for 25 years I've been following, Buddhist path as it used to be between things, and now it's my kind of full-time work with this podcast and book and classes and Buddhist centers and so on. So thank you for asking. I
No,
appreciate
that's
it.
beautiful because I can see the tenderness and gentleness and sweetness and kindness that I was talking about so thoroughly baked into the very rich Buddhist ways of being in the world.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like both you and I were lucky to have so much grounding, spiritual grounding that helped us cultivate those things. A lot of people don't have that. Like, so many people are feeling so hopeless today about just even the possibility of peace, even in one conflict, like in Ukraine, Israel, Palestine. But was there a moment that felt possible for you? Because many people obviously don't feel like that's possible.
The philosopher of war, Clausewitz, I recall reading him years ago and being struck by why it was that philosophers and social thinkers didn't want to say too much about war, and yet war was one of the primary constants of the species. And so you really want to be intellectually honest and talk about just how wretched we are. Now, that does not in any way mean that you can't dream, and you can dream of what is impossible and attempt to make it possible. And in that very process, in the way you connect with other people every day in a nonviolent way with kindness and gentleness and trying to cheer up and uplift people, and then create organizations that bear witness to peace. This is why Dorothy Day and Phil Berrigan and so many others mean so much to me because they're willing to go to jail, right? They're
Mhm.
part of organizations committed to peace, and I'm part of that network myself. So it is a kind of utopian projection in the sense that it's very rare to find a moment in the history of the species where some war was not going on, some violence was not being committed. But that doesn't mean you give up on the dream. It doesn't mean you give up on the possibility of peace, the possibility of justice, the possibility of treating people in the way they ought to be treated, be it the golden rule or a whole host of ways in which human beings have come up with various moral compasses and moral codes for dignified treatment of others.
Hmm. The first time I saw the Dalai Lama, I heard him say, the best way to end war is to first resolve all the conflicts in your own personal life. So I wonder, do you agree with this? Have you found that to be true in your own life? It's a very surprising answer.
No, but he's absolutely right. He's absolutely right. William Butler Yeats used to say it takes more courage to dig deep in the dark corners of your own soul than it does for a soldier to fight on the battlefield. Now, there's always structures and institutions that are in place, and they are shaping us even as we struggle inside of ourselves, because we're shaped by the kinds of families, the kinds of civic institutions, the kinds of cultural practices, be it in media, film, or the books we read, the poetry that we take in, all of these things are shaping who we are. But in the end, if we can't have some kind of relative breakthrough, if not relative victory of the battles inside of us, then it's going to be very difficult to sustain the victories outside of us.
Yeah. Yeah. Personal transformation leads to societal transformation. It's connected. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Hmm. I want to talk to you about economic justice.
Mhm.
There's a beautiful list. Of course, you support eradicating poverty, abolishing homelessness, universal parent leave, universal health care, universal basic income, or at least moving toward that, right to meaningful employment. In theory, these should be things everybody wants, right? Who could disagree with those things? And yet, millions of people have huge fears when you mention even one of these things, right? That they're going to cost too much, that small businesses are going to have to close when we raise the minimum wage. People are going to get lazy or they're going to spend their free money on drugs. Did you ever have fears like these, and how do you process them?
I mean, all those are very, you know, real possibilities because human beings were just so many different kinds of persons. There's no doubt about that. But part of the problem is when you look at the status quo, if you're living in the richest nation in the history of the world and 1% of the population own 90% of the wealth, see, that's a level of grotesque wealth inequality that hides and conceals unbelievable social misery. 62% of our fellow citizens live paycheck to paycheck. See, so that people will say, well, if you talk about making these changes, there's all of these possibilities of chaos. Well, there's a lot of forms of chaos taking place right now in the unjust status quo. And so that I understand what people are saying, and there's nothing wrong with having a certain kind of fear of change, but I want people to have the same sensitivity in terms of a concern of the levels of social injustice in the present if we don't change.
Yeah, it's more scary with the status quo, how things are, than the potential damages of trying to have a more compassionate society.
So you do take a risk. There's no doubt about that. But you do have to take a risk to change yourself. And once you take those risks, of course, there's going to be some anxiety. Of course, there's going to be insecurity. But the breakthrough in that self transformation could, in fact, be so much more, not just positive, but allow you to flourish in ways you hadn't imagined before.
So there's so many dimensions to racial justice, which is
Yeah.
another one of your platforms. And I wonder if you can talk about some of your solutions, like ending mass incarceration, enacting reparations, ending racial abuses by police forces. How do we get there?
Yeah, I think, so much of what we're talking about, my dear brother, has to do with learning how to see things and people more clearly. That then allows you to act more courageously. Racism, in part, is a form of blindness. See, if you see someone and don't see their humanity because of the color of their skin or anything that gets in the way of their humanity that blocks your perception of their humanity, then you've got to learn how to see more deeply, to see more deeply. Um, Buddhism, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, at their deepest, they're getting us to see human beings in all of their humanity. And therefore, it is an indictment of racism. explicit, and implicit. And yet, that seeing has to be cultivated because there's long histories in which people were taught to see people's color as a form of degradation, as a form of their lack of humanity, rather than see their humanity along with their color, whatever color it was. Now, white supremacy, of course, has been much more pervasive than black supremacy. Both of them are immoral, both of them are wrong. But white supremacy has shaped so much of the world from 1492 to 1945, more so than black supremacy. It's just a fact. And therefore, the question becomes, how do we address that in the name of truth, justice, love? And that's always bigger than any of us. You see, that's what is beckoning us, luring us. You see, that it is like a North Star. My dear sister Harriet Tubman here, looking at North Star when she went into the belly of barbaric U.S. slavery to bring those enslaved black folk on the Underground Railroad to Canada or to northern New York or whatever. Well, so it is. Truth, justice, and love are the North Stars. Should be our North Stars, as it were. And that's why on our platform, we have a profoundly humanistic program. Mm-hmm. How do you stay in contact with other people's humanity and then deal with some of the damage that has been done with structures and institutions like slavery and Jim Crow and lynching practices that have had tremendous ugly impact on people of color and black people.
And how do we do that specifically with prisons, with police forces, for example? How do we get I mean, the Dalai Lama always emphasizes, in a way, there's no such thing as an institution. It's all made up of individuals. But how do we transform those individuals and institutions to be more just?
Well, one thing, of course, you want to learn from others.
Uh-huh.
I've always said that the United States would learn so much if they went to Sweden or Norway and others where mass incarceration does not take the form that we see in the United States. It's one of rehabilitation, it's one of education, it's one of trying to convince those who have done certain things that they shouldn't have done to undergo maturation, to believe in themselves enough, have enough confidence in themselves that they can be better human beings. And so you have sites of rehabilitation and education and opportunity for them. Whereas the United States, it's torture, it's solitary confinement, it's mass incarceration. You just pack them in. I've been blessed to teach in prisons now since 1973. That's now 51 years. And I've seen some beautiful sights in terms of human beings wanting to bounce back. I've seen some very, very ugly sights in terms of the treatment of them in there and the crushing of their sense of possibility and potentiality, locked in a certain kind of prison-like situation. There's a disproportionate amount of not just poverty and social misery, but not enough recognition of the humanity of people, sometimes among black people themselves. But when you talk about racism and white supremacy, you're talking about institutions and structures, but you're also talking about hearts and minds, including black hearts and black minds, just like women can be taught to think less of themselves, male supremacy inside of women. Well, it's true for black people, the white supremacy inside of black people. Mm-hmm. And so when we're talking about racial justice, this has to do with how black people treat each other, be it disrespectfully, too violently, how white elites are perceiving black working classes and black poor people, too often in stereotypical forms rather than humanistic forms. But you can see how it's all intertwined again, though. You can't really talk about the racial justice without talking about poverty and access to health care, jobs, housing, quality education, and soul formation. See, you should never downplay soul craft, the soul formation, the cultivation of attention, the maturation of a loving soul.
I read this book recently, Humankind: A Hopeful History by Rutger Bregman. You
I
probably
don't
know
know
him.
that text.
Oh,
I got to
it's a
look at
great
that.
one, but it sounds your solution. It's beautiful how you tie, rationalism with deep compassion, because what I hear you saying in terms of, our institutions is just look at the best practices. Go look at Sweden. He cites like Swedish prisons, and it costs less. They treat people with absolute dignity and respect. They have minimum security prisons, even for, very violent offenders, and it works. People get out, they don't come back, they don't commit more crimes, they become productive members of society again. So there's practical ways we can acknowledge, every
Absolutely.
single person's dignity, no matter their race, no matter what crimes they've committed. And when it's
Absolutely.
already out there, right? That's what I hear you saying. It's actually, we don't have to invent something new, even. It's
People
out
have
there.
been raising these same questions for a long time. You're
Yeah.
absolutely right.
Yeah. And policing too, it's the same thing. If you look at police forces in other countries, in many countries, they don't have any of the same problems we have with the needless racist violence, right?
That's very true, my brother.
Mm. And what about healing the wounds? Like, say, even if we manage to um, repair all the organizations, which would be quite difficult, what about the wounds, centuries of wounds, psychological wounds from racist policies? Do we need to go beyond even the rational reformation of institutions in terms of, making a country that feels whole and just?
Oh, indeed. I mean, you always need more than transformation of institutions and structures because the spiritual and the psychic are not reducible to the institutional and the social. They're intertwined, but they're not irreducible. And in the face of trauma that produces deep wounds, the wounds themselves can never be eliminated. They can be alleviated, but not eliminated. And the fundamental moral and spiritual choice is that choice between a wounded healer and a wounded hurter. And how do you try to spiritually equip yourself to respond to your own wounds in the form of wanting to heal other people's wounds? And the question becomes, well, what is it about we human beings such that we not only can go a better way, but stay on that way and be wounded healers for the rest of our lives as poets, as artists, as parents, as friends, as citizens, as human beings? That's part of the great tradition. Buddhism, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, at their best. I'm always talking about at their best, because each one of those traditions have versions of reproducing hatred, violence, fear, uh, hurting, more pain, rather than the healing of the wounds and the pain. We go back to best practices again. Buddha's got some great examples. Jesus had some great examples. Absolutely, indeed.
Absolutely. I mean, there's not much documented about what Jesus said, but the few things he did were real ringers.
It's true. It's true. Very
um,
good. So all of that free healing and common eating.
yeah. There's another area of so many areas of hopelessness. There's a lot of hopelessness and denial when people start looking at how we're harming our environment.
Oh
And
yeah.
I have a beautiful quote from your platform. You say we can forge a new covenant with the earth in respect, reciprocity, and radical love. So, did you ever feel this kind of hopelessness that so many people feel right now about the environment? And can you tell a story of how you came to believe this is even possible? It's another huge area of hopelessness with people right
Mhm.
now.
Well, I think in general, and Goethe himself said, he or she who has never despaired has never lived. Now, there's different, reasons why people feel hopeless. It could be in ecological catastrophe, or it could be social injustice. It could be personal betrayal. There's all these different motivations that can lead toward a certain kind of nihilism, a sense of meaninglessness and lovelessness and hopelessness and touchlessness. But then the challenge becomes, how do we try to manifest these countervailing forces against the nihilism, against the despair? Well, you don't deny the despair. That's the crucial thing. You have to confront it. And it's very human to deny it because that's the easy way out. The blowback will be intense. But once you acknowledge it, there might be moments when you say, I'm overwhelmed. This is too much. It's like the Grand Inquisitor in Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov, that great prose poem of such profundity that Dostoevsky wrote right before he died. He says, God, the Grand Inquisitor looks around and says, I was a believer, but I don't think these human beings have the capacity to even begin to do what Jesus wants them to do. All they want to do is just get fed and led and drilled because the freedom is too heavy. They don't want to be free. They just want pleasure and happiness. Give it to them, but make them submit and defer so they can't think for themselves and they can't undergo transformation and they never really have genuine experiences of what deep love is all about. Whoa, what a view of the world, see. Dostoevsky laid that out with Ivan's prose poem. Of course, he's a Christian himself, Russian Orthodox tradition, but it's such an indictment of so much of Christianity and institutional religion as a whole. Why? Because that despair is just something that can never be eliminated. It's got to be wrestled with. And you wrestle with it daily, monthly, yearly, but you don't allow it to have the last word. Break the back of fear with love. Love cast it out, fear. Do not be afraid. That's 365 references in the Christian biblical text, 365 times. Do not be afraid. Ooh, afraid of what? Things inside of yourself, things in the world, wickedness in high places, wickedness in the corners of your own soul. Be not afraid. You can work it through and wrestle with it in such a way that your courage will be tied to compassion. Your bravery will be tied to service to others.
Yeah, that's really the Buddhist view too, that the sadness, despair, anger, fear, they all can be fuel for compassion if you use them to connect with others feeling the same way and then give you some energy to work for the better in whatever way you can, right?
Absolutely. I think it's no accident that the greatest European philosopher of pessimism, which is the inimitable Arthur Schopenhauer, who ought to be a skeleton hanging in everybody's closet, because the challenge that he poses is so profound. We don't have to accept his conclusions. Nietzsche's the same way. But in the end, he's got a chapter called The Road to Liberation, Road to Salvation, actually. And he ends up saying, I'm just saying what Buddhism has been saying all these years. I said, oh. Then he says, and some Christian mystics, if you listen to the Sermon on the Prodigal Son by Meister Eckhart, I think it's number 15, he says, he's saying the same thing too. It's what, but Schopenhauer, you associate with all this dimness and grimness and darkness and pessimism. He says, yes, but I'm also acknowledging that that can be fuel. for
Yeah.
compassion.
Yeah.
That can be a fuel for a certain kind of connection and empathetic relation to other people's plight and predicament.
Yes. You and I talked about my daughter the other day when we had our first phone call, but
Yeah,
she
yeah.
she and I, she's 13. She and I have been reading about the life of Gandhi in the
Oh,
evenings, and she's really struck by how long and hard it is to make fundamental changes toward justice in the world. And in Buddhism, we have this principle of joyful effort to stay joyful even through the most difficult tasks. I'm wondering what you do for yourself to cultivate joyful effort, and if the work you're doing ever feels too hard for you.
oh, it does feel hard though, but you tell your precious daughter that she is on to something very deep, that she's absolutely right. It does often seem that it takes a long time because it does take a long time in some cases. Sometimes it happens quickly because history is unpredictable. Sometimes within 2 weeks, you can get a year's development. Sometimes within 2 years, you can get 2 day development. You want to be open, you want to be jazz like and improvisational because you know how flexible and unpredictable history can be. But most importantly, I think the joy that you talk about for me, and this is where my Christian sensibility does see my mother, my beloved mother, had a favorite moment in biblical text, that Thessalonians, the fifth chapter, where Paul talks about be thankful in all circumstances. You say, how could that be? That makes absolutely no sense. Thankful, gratitude, a piety and acknowledgement of the blessings owing to the sources for good in your life in terms of the kind of father and mother that you had, over which you had no control, or the kind of grandparents you had, or the kind of friends you encounter, or the kind of text that you read, the kind of music that you listen to. We're grateful for Beethoven, grateful for Aretha Franklin. Why? Because they're sources of good in our lives. We're thankful for Schiller. We're thankful for Paul Celan and his torturous poetic wrestling with catastrophe. We're thankful to Mark Twain and Herman Melville and Toni Morrison and Chekhov. Of course, Chekhov is my favorite, so I won't
Mm.
go anywhere beyond that. That's about as deep as you can get. But you're thankful that they laid bare in their lives and in their works and in their with their words this source of joy.
Mm.
And that's a love and a joy that go hand in hand.
Yeah.
Yes, with the sense of joy and gratitude and thankfulness.
Oh, it's not. I love how you connected it to art, though, because the way that the greatest art uplifts us. It is the thing. Even my Buddhist teachers tell me about. They get overwhelmed, depressed sometimes, and my teacher says, he puts on the Rites of Spring or something like that to
No
cheer him
Stravinsky,
up.
can you put on a little John Coltrane Love
Yeah,
Supreme?
yeah.
Oh,
Whatever it
indeed.
is for
That
you.
would that would uh that would cheer you up.
Yeah. My daughter really wanted to be part of this interview in person, but she's out of the house right now today. But she recorded a question for you. I wonder for our last question if you'd consider answering hers.
Absolutely.
Okay, let me play it for you here.
God bless her.
What do young people like me have to look forward to in our country's future?
Did you hear that?
Oh, I did hear her lovely voice. What do young people like me have to look forward to in our country's future? Yes, indeed, indeed. Well, I would say to your blessed daughter that uh, we must always connect the three dimensions of time, the past, the present, and the future. So anytime we're looking to the future, we're looking also to the best of the past being preserved and manifest. And what is the best of the past? The memories of love of those who are no longer with us must always be part of the future. No doubt about that. We must be open to change and innovation, but change and innovation that is filtered with a commitment to truth, justice, and love, because we know all change is not good, all innovation is not good, but a change and innovation that allows for the flourishing of justice and love and a sense of genuine human connection, that kind of I-thou flourishing that the great Martin Buber talked about, rather than just the I-it, the transformative as opposed to the transactional. And so young folk always have something to look forward to, because they themselves carry with them, when they're conscious, the best of their past and the best of their present. And then to want to be able to make sure that in their future, love, the courage, the justice can be found, can be promoted. And I know your precious daughter is one of those I'm talking about. A force for good at the deepest level.
Well, Dr. West, I can't not tell you what an extraordinary gift it is to spend an hour of your life with you. So thank you so
This
much for
has been a
joining us.
joy for me. I can tell you that. And this is not the last one, no, Brother Scott. This has been just a pure delight, though, man. It really is. And you got a very special, anointed spirit, I'm telling you, brother. It's a beautiful thing to be in conversation with you.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Keep up all of your wonderful work. I really appreciate it. And the world needs it. Thank you.
Well, indeed. Stay strong now.
Thanks.
And say hello to your beloved daughter, Brother Scott.
Yes, I will. I will. Thank you.
All right. You all take good care now.
Thanks for joining me for my interview with Dr. Cornel West. You can find out more about Dr. West at cornelwest.com and cornelwest2024.com. If you enjoyed this episode, you might enjoy the book based on our podcast's modern approach to Buddhist wisdom, How to Train a Happy Mind. You can get the book in paper, ebook, and audiobook format anywhere you buy books. If you'd like to go deeper in your meditation practice and find like-minded people interested in talking about the ideas discussed in the podcast, go to howtotrainahappymind.org to sign up for our newsletter and join our Train a Happy Mind community that offers weekly lectures, meditations, classes, and discussions. If you have the means, please also consider making a donation to our podcast. How to Train a Happy Mind is a nonprofit project of a skeptic's path to enlightenment. Our podcast and programs are free and ad-free thanks to our generous donors. To support us now, visit our website at howtotrainahappymind.org. We accept cash, credit, Bitcoin, and other cryptocurrencies, and your donations are tax-deductible in the U.S. Thanks to Annie Nguyen for production and story editing, Christian Parry for mastering, and Isabella Acebal for marketing. We wish you a wonderful day.